Welcome to the Innovate Europe podcast, where we talk to the founders and funders and all those who shape the European innovation ecosystem. I'm your host, Clark Parsons. I'm the managing director of the Innovate Europe Foundation, but also the CEO of the European Startup Network. And today I'm really excited. I'm joined here by Rafael Laguna de la Vera. I always get the name. I just always say Rafael
Perfect.
Laguna. He's the founding director of SPRIN-D, which is the Sprung Innovation Deutschland, which is the German federal agency for breakthrough innovation. Rafael, you have a long history in the tech world. You founded your first software company at age 16, Elephant Software. You were a computer scientist and shareholder at Die Computer GmbH. You were also a consultant in the late 80s and 90s and later head of sales and MD at Mikado GmbH. You became a tech investor, an interim manager, and a consultant for different VC funds. And then in 2008, you did something really interesting in terms of entrepreneurship. You were the co-founder and CEO of Open Exchange, which was an open source software, or is an open source software for email and office productivity. And most importantly for this conversation, in 2019, you became the founding, first and only, director of SPRIN-D, the federal agency for breakthrough innovation. You're also a guest lecturer at various universities. And for those who live in Germany, really and Europe, one of the experts in the world of innovation and especially how governments can foster it. So really excited to have you with us, Rafael. Welcome.
Thanks, Clark, for having me.
Yeah, really great. Let's you just mentioned to me that you were born in Leipzig, which is already, we could spend an hour on that because you were born behind the Iron Curtain, so to speak, but got out as a boy because your father was Spanish. Get me from Elephant Software up to SPRIN-D. I mean, just a quick dash through a career, but especially I think it's fascinating. You started a tech company at age 16. That's not something most teenagers do. So you clearly were into tech very early on. How did you get on this path?
I guess it's because I have a very entrepreneurial family, even the one in East Germany, which kind of sounds weird. But my great grandfather had a little machine shop and he was independent. And somehow, because he had a Dutch wife, he managed to sort of fuddle through and keep the machine shop. So I grew up as a young child in this environment. My parents were freelancing translators. And when we moved over, a crazy uncle from LA was an entrepreneur, and he built saunas in California, which kind of sounds crazy. Seems it should be hot enough there, but no, it was still a good business. He brought the first skateboards to our little town in West Germany that I then moved to. And my parents founded the first skateboard company in Germany when I was 12, right? So in a way, founding my company sounds big, but just starting some kind of business at 16 seemed pretty natural to me. So I somehow, I couldn't imagine being employed anywhere. Well, now I am, right? Now I'm a government employee, which is probably even more than just being employed. But it wasn't one of my ideas to begin with, for sure. And then I love that. I just like being able to do what you think should be done. Some would say, my teachers and everybody afterwards, that I sometimes have problems adhering to some orders that I don't consider meaningful. That didn't work well in school either. So being an entrepreneur, self-employed, like they say, you get less of that. So yeah, that's probably what I did. Then the other thing is, of course, this is in the 70s, and all the computer stuff was just coming into existence. That's the time when Apple and Microsoft was founded, when we had the first microprocessors and things. That was really exciting. It was a small tech community. It was nothing that people really knew much of at the time. And so I sort of started with the birth of this industry, and so naturally growing with it. So I got lucky to be there when it all began, and that's probably most of my life. And then when I was 55, very fast forward, when this offer came to help building some German version of ARPA or DARPA, of course, that's something new that I hadn't done before, very entrepreneurial and something completely different, and the opportunity for me to give back, because I was so lucky. I mean, coming from East Germany to West Germany and having all these opportunities, that's pure luck. And I thought, well, we should make sure that this great country and region, Europe, remains to be a great place for as many people as possible. So let's help there.
That's fantastic. I want to get to SPRIN-D in a minute. I really want to do a deep dive on it. But one station right before SPRIN-D, I think, is really, really interesting and also salient for this notion of European sovereignty and tech sovereignty. In 2008, you started OpenX, and the email market was still pretty wide open then. I mean, Gmail and Outlook hadn't really, they dominate now, but I'm just curious what took you out of investing back into entrepreneurship? What did you see? What was your vision to say, oh, the world needs OpenX?
The thing was that open source software was always a thing, and actually software started being open source to begin with. Back in the times in the US, it was the Homebrew Computer Club and the FidoNet and CompuServe. We were happily exchanging any source code that we created and meshed it together into something new. This is the way it went. Then software as a business was invented, you might say, by Microsoft. And then it was locked away, only distributing the compiled code, which as techies kind of hate it all the time because it's it's not something natural. Open source software creation is very scientific because you publish what you do, and so the next one can build on top of that, so your progress is faster. And of course we do see that. And then the first time commercially, really, I got heavily in touch with open source software was me as an investor into SUSE Linux in November 2001, believe it or not. That was right after 9/11 when the tech market was crashing and burning and all companies went out of business, including SUSE. We saved them with our money, but also I went in to help them build a business model. So I got infected with open source, not only as this scientific approach to creating software, but also as a means to business. So you could combine the two. And actually, Open Exchange was founded 2005 when I was still a VC. Joined then as the CEO in 2008 when I got out of investing into this. Yeah, the opportunity, obviously, when the things that you don't see of the internet is all open source. The big boys try to lock it away, trying to create proprietary protocols. But one reason why email is still so good and works across everything, across an Outlook and Gmail and what have you, is because it's an open standard and it's well implemented. So with Open Exchange, we started developing user interfaces for this, including all this calendaring stuff, sort of an open source Outlook, if you like. And then two open source companies joined us, PowerDNS and Dovecut. Dovecut is still the most widely used IMAP server in the world. I don't know what it is today, but back in the day, it was about 70% of all email was running on Dovecut IMAPs. So you might say Dovecut IMAP is actually the most popular email server in the world, not service, because people are creating services with it. But if you're an Orange customer, Deutsche Telekom customer, BT customer, so you're using Dovecut, you're using PowerDNS, and many use the Open Exchange application suite as well. So open source proliferates greatly. Of course, you're not creating monopolies, and thus maybe your business is not going the way it does with the hyperscalers, but it creates a very healthy ecosystem. And that's what I still love about it. And this is why and this is why I still think this is the way into European sovereignty in all things digital. It's simply, if we take open source as the guiding star, and the same applies to AI models, as much open as possible, not just open weight, but also everything else. I think we can create a very European ecosystem that is very healthy, will create very healthy business, but no monopolies. And that's what we should be thriving for.
I agree on the no monopolies part. I must say it is frustrating to see how much value gets captured by the hyperscalers compared to everybody else who is working on these open systems. Is there a way to continue to have this open system thriving, moving things forward? We've seen this tension already in the AI world where, in a way, openness is kind of winning. At least the Chinese have shown how a whole ecosystem can ride it to the top. How can we keep that, but still capture some value in Europe?
The thing is, we're actually overpaying with the monopolies. If you look at the prices that we're paying for cloud services, it's crazy. It's really crazy. I mean, it's a factor more that we're paying for it. And of course, that makes them very wealthy. So in a way, you might say, there's value extracted from us, to put it on the negative side, and that should stop, and that will create value because that money will then be available for other stuff that we can do with it, right? So why send it to to these gigantic companies? They're doing fine, and they will be, even if we're not overpaying for the cloud services. So step one should be to create interoperable cloud services that we're not overpaying. Right? We're all already pretty good at creating sort of low-level infrastructure services. You can buy servers very well in Germany, or like my friend Bert Hubert said, you can buy wood very well in Europe, but not furniture, and people want furniture. And the hyperscalers are the furniture makers. They are the IKEAs. You get everything from them. You go there and you have 300 services that you can buy. That's furniture, right? But you can have a server from Hetzner or 1&1 or OVH or what have you, and they're great, and they're fantastically cheap. People that come from hyperscalers and say, oh, I could put it on my own server, what, $50 a month, and that's it, with all traffic and terabytes of storage. How could that be? So in a way, taking that further into a furniture industry, also creating furniture is what we should do. And that furniture should be open source furniture, because then you can switch between cloud providers. You actually have competition. So we're back to a viable economy, which we are not right now. You're able to switch if you don't like your current provider anymore, or they don't scale with you, or what have you. You can use multiple for resilience, makes sense anyway, not to be dependent on one, also for other reasons. That all will create a lot of benefits. It will get the prices down. And because it's based on a huge open source stack, it will drive innovation. And we should get back to that, because we're not actually driving innovation in basic cloud services that much anymore.
This is really compelling. I could go another hour because as you know, the Eurostack movement, industry-based movement that's really pushing for buy European and to really rely on these European providers to build a complete stack is something that I think both of us are supportive of. But I would, in the interest of time, I have to move to the topic of what you're doing today, because it's equally fascinating. And that's running the Agency for Disruptive Innovation. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, you initially got involved because I think you were part of the search committee putting it together, right? And as part of that process, I guess everybody looked around the room and said, Rafael, actually, you're the person who should run this. Tell me about this process of how this went from an idea to some people in a room to something concrete.
Yeah, well, it did happen. It wasn't it wasn't planned, at least by me. I don't know if anybody inside the commission had that idea to begin with. I'm not sure, but it was really, for me, the first time being called into something like this. I did not have all that many touch points with government, and so I get called into a Bundesministerium, into a federal agency with a nice letterhead and everything. And so for the first time in my life, I went into a ministry in Berlin, with all this fancy stuff. But I engaged myself very much. I loved the idea. I was told that, and I later learned that that was actually true. Angela Merkel, the then chancellor, was pushing this idea. It was her idea. She wanted it. It was proposed by people in the ecosystem, in the scientific ecosystem. And so I went all in designing this, but also writing down what the profile of the founding director should be. What we were looking for was both a scientific person, but also an entrepreneurial person that had experience on both sides. So I don't have that much experience on the scientific side, because I only spent 3 weeks in the University of Dortmund until I found out that computer sciences in Dortmund in '86 wasn't all that enticing for me. They later sent me to Harvard, so I might claim as all. I've also been to Harvard, but I'm certainly not an academic person. But I'm broadly interested in technology, and I've spent my life there. And then after a dinner, actually, with the minister, one of these guys, Dietmar Haaf, approached me. He was leading the group and said, Rafael, you wrote and read the profile of the CEO. Why don't you apply? And I said, yeah, because I have open exchange, 300 people, what have you, right? I'm not available. And he said, yeah, but that's okay, but we're just not finding anybody appropriate, and we need somebody like you, right? Like with a lot of grit and resilience, because it won't be easy to do this. And what this touched me, and I thought for not very long, maybe 3 days, called my board. They were completely shocked, and I said, by the way, I've decided to do this other thing, and then called the team and said, okay, I'm out, I'm applying. So I left this group, because I was now applying from the outside, and I was invited to a pitch. I pitched, and they liked what they heard, and they offered me the job. There's more around this. I mean, this is probably over a beer. I was then shocked that I was the only one proposed, so there was not an option for me to pull back. I mean, I could have still done that, but then the whole process would have to be started from the beginning, and I would be the one delaying this whole process. I think that was a trap, but anyway, so I said yes, and I didn't know what I was doing, right?
One of the things that people love about German products around the world is that they are innovative, but with, let's say, incremental innovation, sort of Japanese Kaizen method. I mean, your automobile gets a little bit better every year, but SPRIN-D was there to create breakthrough innovation, by design. So there was clearly also in the ecosystem. I remember back then people, saying this, like, we need to do bolder things. How do you define what breakthrough innovation is? And was something like DARPA in the US the model? Like, where did this concept of let's create something that takes really bold risks, where did this concept come from, and what's the philosophy that launched it?
Several things. One is that Europe 150 years ago was capable of translating a scientific breakthrough into new industries. In Germany, it's called Gründerzeit, the founder's time. And we founded the chemical industries, the pharma industries, the automobile industry, which is sort of invention, not just making the invention, but also bringing it into the world and thus creating an industry. And all our wealth is still based on those inventions. And that was breakthrough at the time. A car was certainly a breakthrough innovation, but also everything we did in pharma and chemistry, lots of breakthrough innovations, like being able to feed the world and the Haber Bosch and these things, right? That's all things that were not only breakthrough inventions, but they were innovations because Haber Bosch, they both made sure that an industry was created that produced this stuff so everybody could have it and it had its impact on the world. Now, so it did work, capable of doing this in Europe. After the Second World War, we were rebuilders. We had to rebuild Europe again, and make sure those old industries started to work again. And then we went into incremental innovation because that was enough. It was just good enough. I mean, we have incredible wealth here still, but also all the inventors that had breakthrough innovations in Europe eventually did not find a place to go inside Europe to turn it into an innovation and bring it into the world. Not the money, not the industry that was interested in what they were doing, like the inventors of MP3, the audio compression format. They went to Telefunken and Grundig and those companies that we had back in the day that were still creating consumer electronics, but nobody cared. So eventually, Steve Jobs picked it up and built the iPod. And this sort of almost, this is an example. And in most cases, somehow we participate in the invention, like AI. We have fantastic AI research and profs and stuff, right? And many of the things that you see and many of the principles that you see were invented in Europe, but not turned into the open AIs of this world. So America and China just did a much better job of creating this flywheel of turning innovation into products and companies that became very valuable, that created lots of millionaires that then invested into these companies, into these startups again, and then you rinse and repeat. And that's been going on for many years. So we missed microcomputers. We missed, even though we had players, like we had Nixdorf and these guys. Nobody knows of them anymore unless you're as old as I. But they were there and they all died because that industry moved to the US, to Japan, and later to China. The same for the internet. The internet is actually a DARPA, an ARPA invention, right? It was called the ARPANET back in the day. But, I'm always fascinated on how America, the US, is capable of taking such technologies and throwing a lot of money at it to turn it into an industry. And we saw the internet industry created. We saw the mobile industry created. I mean, we had Nokia as the lead mobile phone company in Europe until the iPhone came. When the iPhone came, Nokia was on the top of the world, right? And the most valuable company in Europe, and really valuable, with 1 billion customers and stuff like that. And then came the iPhone, and everybody was laughing until they were not laughing. So we lost our mojo. So this is why Angela Merkel at the time was, consulted by the EFI Commission, who said we need something like ARPA. And we were very much inspired by that because they are sort of an independent agency created together with NASA by Eisenhower after the Sputnik shock, but very different from what we do because the US is different. Right? We have pretty good basic research funding in Europe, not so much in the US. So DARPA is much earlier with technologies than we are because they also have to finance basic research. Sprint design does not do that. We start after basic research when sort of science funding stops. And usually we then drop the ball or sell it off. This is where we're coming in. And this is what we call the valley of death for tech. There are more valleys of death, but this is valley of death for deep tech. Let's make sure we get the IP out of the universities, give them funding and network and everything to help them all the way through until this thing flies by itself. And that's different from DARPA. DARPA is very focused, very programmatic. They do incredible things. They only do, they top down, they decide what fields they want to invest in the coming year. And that's what they do. At Sprint, we do top-down stuff with challenges where we say we want a solution to problem A, B, C. That's top-down. We do several of those per year, 4, 5, 6 or so. And also we do project financing where anybody at any time can apply with their TRL3++ project, right?
Tech readiness level, yeah.
Technology readiness level, which is 0 is basic research, and 1 and 2, and then with 3 you start building prototypes, and then at 7, 8 you turn this into a product. We're between 3 and 7. We have tools where we can give them money just like that does not end up on the cap table. And then eventually we can start co-investing with private investors when they start getting appetite for the project. And we can bring in other means of financing if it's a really, really big thing like a fusion plant or something that we need additional money from the outside. And we stay with these companies until we feel, okay, now they're off on their own and this will fly. And this is not what DARPA does. So sprint design is quite different.
Yeah, it's actually, in a way, it must be incredibly tempting because it's something I learned from you now that the U.S. is actually having to go in and do the basic stuff, but actually you have this embarrassment of riches coming out of European research institutes. How do you determine what problem you want to solve or what area to focus upon? Because you probably could go crazy choosing.
Well, we are looking for breakthrough innovation. This is our vertical, if you like. And breakthrough innovation means it needs to be world changing if it works out. We're not focusing on any technologically defined vertical definition. So we're not saying we don't do red life sciences or we don't do nuclear or so we don't say that. But we've seen 2,500 project proposals at Sprint now after 5 years. It's about 30% life sciences. It's about 30% energy and environment. And it's about 30% anything digital, if you like, mostly hardware, like quantum sensors and things like that. And then 10% is social innovation, which we also do, which is not primarily driven by technology, but which always involves technology, like education. So what we looked at is what's there, right? What's the ecosystem, and how can we pull this out, from basic science and make sure it turns into industries of the future. That's what we do, and we did not say we're focusing on X, Y, or Z.
When someone is an investor, they, of course, after a few years, point to the portfolio and say, look, we got follow-on investments, or this is in the marketplace now. How are you guys measuring success, and or like what have you seen already where Sprint has been able to really have an effect or move the needle? I'm curious to know, like, if you see the research institutes taking more risk because maybe they know that a Sprint exists and that something might not die in the valley of death of tech. Like, I'm curious to know if you're already seeing validation from your place in this ecosystem based on the role you guys have been playing, because projects previously would have, I presume, died or not gotten funded. So you guys have clearly, I think, proven the model.
Yeah, we have, and of course, as we go, I mean, we're building this plane whilst flying, right? So we're a startup, so we started at 0 in 2020, right? And then Corona came, which was a lot of fun building this. We did our first challenge in mid 21. and also our first project funding with our first tools. But then we found we cannot develop all the tools that we want, like co-financing with the private sector. And we found out we need a law for that to be able to do that, to sort of free Sprint. And actually, it's called the Sprint-Freiheitsgesetz, the Sprint Liberty Law, which is quite something, right? Can you imagine? I have a little frame above my bed saying Sprint-Freiheitsgesetz, which is quite an achievement. But it took us 4 years to get it, right? At the end of 23, we got it, but we wanted to launch anyway. And so that's one. The early KPIs were, do we see enough viable projects at all? We did not know that when we went out. Do we get enough applications when we launch a challenge? That's early KPIs. So we found, okay, we're getting roughly 400 project applications per year. That's a good number. In the early days, 3% of those checked our boxes, and we funded them somehow. Today, it's 7%. So the quality has gone up. So the research institutions have learned what our appetite is, have adjusted their projects towards being more viable for us, so that we can translate this into something that gets into the world, that becomes a real innovation. So you can see from that KPI already it's happening. Now that we have these co-investment tools and we can find additional money for our projects on the outside, another important KPI is how much co-investments from the outside do we get? How do we leverage our money? Of course, we're only able to do this for a good year now, but we're also seeing a leverage of above 2 at the moment. So €1 from us gets in €2 from the outside. That number will go significantly up. I believe in 5-6 years, we will be at 20. That one sprint euro will leverage €20 from the outside.
Wow.
Which is incredible, because that gives you a lot more leeway for the projects. And of course, when external investors are in the game with you, you're also more powerful, because these guys also know stuff that we don't know or cannot do as a government agency. So that is very important. Well, and then the ultimate test, of course, is what have you delivered? What projects, eventually are there and are changing the world? Now, breakthrough innovation usually takes some 15 years plus minus. Even the Googles and Apples of this world, it all took them quite some time before they were what we now know they are. It took them a long time to get there. But of course, there are things that are faster. So the first physical thing that you will see in a year from now is the highest wind turbine in the world, windmill. It will be 300 meters plus 65 meters. It will be the second floor on existing wind parks. It generates 3 times the energy, the electricity that compared to 100 meters windmills. And you can put them in the same park. So now you can, get much more energy out from that park. It's what we call an architectural breakthrough innovation, because it's lots of little things. It's like the iPhone was an architectural breakthrough innovation, because none of the technologies that the iPhone used were invented by Apple, really. They put it together into what we now know as a smartphone. And the same applies to what we're building there. Software is usually faster. So we're going to see one thing that we're very excited about is called rule mapping, which is software that allows you to follow the law as code rule, where we're codifying law right into a rule map that generates code, so that we can not only check whether laws actually function and are not redundant or illogical, which many of them are, but also with the press of a button, you can create the software that allows the implementation of the law, which will drive the way governments work, but also any rule-based thing. A contract is also a rule-based thing, right? And everybody that is paying taxes know how cumbersome tax law is, because it's changing all the time. And the poor makers of tax software, they have to change their software all the time. And then the software makes mistakes and so forth. So we're closing the loop on that. And software the company is there. They also already have revenues after not even a year old as a company. I'm sure they will be a unicorn, because they will be changing the world, the digital world in a big way. There are other things like nuclear fusion, where we'll probably need another 15 years before we have the first nuclear fusion power plant. But with technologies on their way, and that's the other KPIs that I haven't mentioned in between, you can define milestones saying, next I want to see this, next I want to see that. And you can do that in competition with many teams. And eventually, hopefully, at least one gets through and builds this thing. We financed 200 projects. I would say 2/3 of them are still active with us. According to portfolio strategy, many of these will fail. but some of these will be successful. I'm sure the portfolio is already big enough. And if you go to our website at SPRIN-D with a D, .org, you'll see all these projects. It's all, I mentioned only a few. It's all super exciting stuff.
It wasn't part of the law. I mean, you just mentioned failure, which is normally something that government expenditure does not like to be associated with. Everyone who's familiar with how venture capital works, knows the power law and knows that the system is actually designed to withstand 8 or 9 out of 10 of the companies failing because one does really well and pays back the fund. And that's by design because you can never really know. But I know that politically, it's probably always difficult for politicians to say, we've put our money into a lot of things that are not going to work out. Was that a part of this law or the mind shift that you had to get the government to buy into this embracing risk, knowing, actually calculating failure in, knowing that you will still have success?
It was built into the original design of Sprint already, because if that wasn't, we wouldn't be able to take the risks that lead to these breakthrough innovations. And then you failed a priori. Either you're dead already before you've even started. So that was always a thing that we pushed for. It's not always easy to communicate, especially when you talk to, the household managers in Bundestag,
Budget committee. Yeah.
budget committee in Congress, I guess it is, in the US. That's difficult. You can portfolio strategy. You can say, look at the VC space. This is how it works. That the only way to have the real disruptive stuff is to take the really high risks. So that's for sure. Nobody wants to fail. A lot of people get that wrong. How can you design for failure? Yeah, no, but we're designing for being able to cope with failure. Right? But we don't want to fail, but we will fail. We know that, right? And if we don't have that mindset, we won't take the risk, and then we failed already, right? So that's the thing. I think we're good still. I mean, we've been audited by the Bundesrechnungshof, by I don't know what the English word for that is, but it's
Yeah, I
the
guess the
auditors of
Federal Budget Oversight Office or something. Yeah.
Right. So they gave us a check. We were evaluated by Fraunhofer Easy. They said we're actually filling a big hole in the innovation system, and we're doing it the right way. So far we have all the political support that we could hope for. Also, political independence is important, just as important, because technologies, like I said, they take 15 years to evolve. You have a lot of change in politics at the time, but you have to stick through. You have to stay with it, right, over all these phases. And so when we say, oh, we invest in nuclear fusion, there are quite a few people in parliament against this and parties against this, but we said we do it anyway, and we educate you why this is a good thing. And we were able to educate many of them, and now most think it's a good thing. But it took us 5 years to do that, but we launched the projects anyway, and we did not lose any time. That's the both superpowers that we have at Sprint, that we're able to do that.
Have you evolved in the types of projects, or rather the types of people that are doing the projects? Not every professor wants to be an entrepreneur. The people who might have the breakthroughs do not necessarily want to or have the ability to build a company on top of it.
Of course, we learned a lot as we built this. And so we built an education program we call Talentwerk, where we educate the scientists what entrepreneurship is, how VCs think, what a cap table is, what a pitch deck should look like, how you deliver a pitch, and all these things. And that's an ongoing little internal education for the teams. We have a co-founder program where people can apply, and anybody that's hearing or looking at this and is interested and has some
Super.
experience as an entrepreneur can apply. And then we connect the teams that are lacking that capability with the co-founders. So you can say, as a team, you can say, I need one, right? And then we make this call into this co-founder program, and everybody can look at it, and who's interested can meet the team and see if something happens. Or the other way around, if you're saying, I'm really interested into life science, I want to bring some new drugs into the market real quick for cancer or so, because I'm my family and what have you, these things. And we say, okay, here's our 5 projects that we have. Look how you can help. And it's incredible what support we're getting and what big names are applying. Because sometimes you don't need to be an operational manager. Sometimes you just become a board member and a business angel, and you open your Rolodex, right? And you help the people connect. And we're doing, Sprint is also actively doing that. You can imagine after 5 years what our Rolodex looks like. So we can, and that's, if you ask the teams, they will tell you that is worth its weight in gold. Of course, you need money, but you need that too. And now to your other, sort of to answer this question on, do you think we've had this impact? If you ask the teams, right, that we're working with, whether they would be where they are without the help of Sprint, I guess 95% will say no. We wouldn't even have founded a company. We wouldn't even be here. And we're hearing that a lot, and not even when we're asking, but they're saying it out loud and free. And that's sort of the most, how should I say? That's really the moment where you feel like, okay, wow, this works.
It's great. What are some of the projects? I mean, they might be years away from hitting the market or seeing the light of day, but what's exciting you right now about some of the projects you're seeing?
I get this asked a lot, as you can
Do you?
imagine, and yeah, yeah, and it's like, our joke is we're working in a chocolate factory, and every day, you have these 10 new chocolates that you can try, and you go, oh, this is good, oh, this is good, and then the next day again. But of course, we're also a government agency, so we're also working at a galley, and sometimes you just have to push through to get it done. 4 years to sprint law. So it's enough chocolate factory to keep us paddling and ruddering. That's good. So there is no favorite project that we have. Like I said, we financed 200, 140 or so are still active. So I can go down the list. Of course, there are some where I say, um, this is fun. I mean, this is going to be awesome. Challenges are great because you're seeing several teams, maybe 10 teams working on the same thing. Some of these innovations are more visible, like we do the second round of our drone challenge, where the challenge is to, without GPS, to navigate through rough terrain and rain and fog and pick up a box and bring it back safely. Right, the first round nobody accomplished this. We had 14 teams at a big military airfield, where we could do all this crazy stuff. But you can imagine what the competition was like. That was real fun, right? Because you see these flying things. If somebody comes up with the AI composite learning challenge, I mean, it's a computer screen. It's still exciting if you're into this technology, but it's not so easily transported. But then, if you go to life science, I mean, we're having crazy stuff like DNA origami or clearing waters from microplastics, which is a terrible thing, and we're not fully aware of the damage this stuff does. But also more cheaply creating water without chemicals. And I could ramble on, right? This is all, you go like, wow, 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 wow. It is super stuff.
That's really fantastic. And what I love is the fact that you clearly get excited by breakthrough technology. And I imagine that you've been able to build a culture in the organization of the same type of people. Tell me about building the culture of a house full of people who get excited about tech like this.
Always done this in my companies to try to hire the people that are better than I at, as many things as possible, right? Make myself superfluous in a way, and entice them with what at stake if we're failing, but also what they can accomplish in terms of the ideas that they have. So I said, look, I provide you with the environment. I fight for this law. I make sure we get the monies. I make sure we can operate as we want. And we're inside our little pyramid. And I make sure that you're not being diverted too much by all this other stuff, by the galley stuff. I do the galley ruddering most of the time for you, right? But you have to come. It's most of the people that are at the highest level of Sprint, we call them innovation managers. We have about 20 of them now. Sort of have been successful in their walks of life. So they usually have some kind of scientific background, then entrepreneurial background. Many of them are musicians, which is also interesting. And they're just very interesting people. When you meet them, you would go like, wow, interesting person, right? That's fantastic. And that's the people I'm scouting. And then I talk to them and I say, look, you need to come, right? You have to save Europe. And you have to give back. You want your children to live in the same great Europe that we have, or even a better one. It's your call now. You are the guys that can make a difference because you've proven that you can, right? You've done it, and thus you're qualified. And believe it or not, many people click like I did when I was asked. Right? They just go like, yeah, that makes sense. And now, of course, with the greater visibility that we have as Sprint, in the early days, it was a little more difficult. I had to go through my personal network and convince people to not retire, but instead, come to us. Now it's a lot of people applying. They say it's so great what I see, what you're doing. How can I help? And that's fantastic. And not all become innovation managers. Some just become jury members in a challenge, or experts, or they become angel investors in a project that we have. So there's many ways to contribute to the cause that we're driving, and that works very well. I mean, if you walk into Sprint, we don't look like a government agency, like a Behörde. Not very much. It does not at all feel like it. There are little galley details, like we cannot pay for the coffee of our employees. They have to pay themselves because of
Okay.
fantastic regulation. Right? And of course, then another little tidbit is that a lot of these people that work for Sprint are used to a different lifestyle. They were CEOs of their own company, right? And they had no Bundesreisekostenverordnung or something, right? They did whatever they wanted. And I tell them, you can continue doing that, but unfortunately you have to pay it yourself because we cannot reimburse you. But for most people, it's, well, okay, well, then that's how it is, right?
That's brilliant. A labor of love. Let's go maybe to the higher, the European level, or the systemic level. You said in an article recently in the Tagesspiegel that you thought that Germany needed a more intelligent innovation policy. What do you mean by that? Because it feels like you guys are on your way. Were you talking about Europe, or were you talking about what we still need to do to improve Germany? Like, what screws do we need to turn now?
All of that. I mean, we're still a very small part of the sort of innovation funding, let's call it that, of federal and state government. Sprint's budget this year will be 250 million euros, which is a lot of money, but compared to the budget of 20 billion of the agency in charge, it's not a whole lot. And now, if you look at the state level with the universities, if you look at the European level, there is a lot of money, but also in terms of public-private partnerships, there's a lot of money. All these IPCEI programs from the European Commission, EIC, Horizon Europe, and what have you. And most of these are still done the old way, where it takes forever until you get your money if you apply, where the application is very cumbersome, so that many people don't even apply anymore because it's way too much work, not only to write the application, but then also to fulfill all the obligations that come with the money in terms of reporting that you need to do and evaluation and so forth, which when you think of it is wild. This process from creating a program, which takes 2 years, to publishing the program and people applying, which takes another year and a half, to getting the money, which takes another year, we're talking 5 years. Innovation is not waiting for us to do our bureaucratic labor of love. It just moves on. And especially if you look at technologies like AI, I mean, every day we wake up to some news that something big has changed. 5 years is an eternity. 5 years ago, almost nobody was talking about AI. And now everybody is, right? So that's how the world changes. So at Sprint, we've developed such tools like the one KPI that we have that we take very seriously is time to money from application to sprint. Of course, you get rejections. That usually goes even faster for most projects, not for all. But what's really important is if you come to us and say, I have this great project, of course you're in a rush, in a hurry, you're under pressure. You know that others are coming too, and you want to move as quickly as possible. So time to money for the challenges is, instead of years, it's a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
Time to money for project funding. The first money you get from us is usually what we call a validation contract, where we want to validate your contract, but also help you move forward. Is maybe 60 days as max, because it's individualized. It takes a little longer. The challenge is more programmatic, and then as this goes, we already developed the next funding tool for this team if we like what we see. So then it becomes seamless. So funding follows funding at the appropriate stage of the project until this thing flies by itself. And now, what I meant to say, we have everything we need. We've created a law that allows us to do this. We can expand this law to everybody. We have tools that didn't even need a law, like the challenges. We have a tool called pre-commercial procurement that was developed in 2008 by the Commission. It's there. We just need to use it, and that gets you down to those 2-3 weeks time to money. Draghi put this in his paper when he was criticizing the EU for being too slow. He said, "Why don't you do it this way?" And if you look at the communications that's now coming from EIC and ERC, they're actually pushing for faster time to money. They learned this. And of course, now I want everybody else to do it. I mean, can you imagine if we take 5 years down to, let's say, 6 months, not 14 days, 6 months? What an incredible impact that will have. I mean,
Yeah, the European Investment Bank, I think they've announced they want to get their decision whether to invest in funds or other things from 18 months down to 6. For me, that's still long, but hey, cutting a year away is still pretty great. So I see that, and I mean, you mentioned the EU, as you noted, the European Innovation Council. There are a lot of proposals now on the table in the startup and scale up plan to massively increase their budget. So I think all around Europe, there's a realization about the need for programs like what you're doing. How can you have an agency like SPRIN-D work with European entities better? I mean, what we don't need is 27 national innovation agencies, or do we? How do we get the national and the European working together better?
what I learned in my time at Sprint is the best way is actually to have a few leading countries that do this. So Germany is now leading with building Sprint in this new tool. We're talking to many out there, including the National Science Foundation in the US. But we just signed a partnership with Vinnova in Sweden, which is the innovation agency in Sweden. And we've been talking a lot, and we've been showing to them how we do challenges. So this is how our challenges get bigger. Also, how we can cross pollinate about ideas, and opportunities that we have. We have an employee paid by the government of France at Sprint in Leipzig, which learns how we operate, which is also our liaison manager. And we're hoping we'll have a delegation coming this month. And hopefully we can help them build a French version of Sprint. Agence de Rupture will be the name, which I like a lot.
Just
The
de
rupture is
rupture. I love it.
and so once we have a few Europeans, it's much easier for Brussels to start doing something. So now, because now if we have a couple of member countries already being there, they might now say, okay, let's do a European sprint program. It won't be called sprint because that's Deutschland, right? We do a SPRIN-D or something.
Mhm.
Whatever they want to call it, doesn't matter all that much. And then you can leverage, the cooperation between all European countries and the capabilities of the union. But I think starting grassroots was a pretty good idea because we just got going.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, the bias for action is always to be applauded in that regard. Give me an idea about an area where you have now called for a new type of innovation agency, and that's in military. We're all watching now since 3 years how Ukraine has gone from fighting for its life on the defense to becoming one of the most innovative ecosystems there is in military technology. And of course, they've innovated not just on the battlefield, but also in the way that society has organized its fundraising, the way, I mean, there's a system of charities training people. The brigades are fundraising and doing their own weapon purchasing themselves. So they've decentralized warfare and sort of crowdsourced it, if you will, in a really fascinating way. But in general, you've called for sprint.mil, so to really do military innovation at your level as well. Has the role of defense innovation changed for you at Sprint because of the Ukraine war or other realizations? Why did you call for a Sprint mill?
But it's the realization that war is an innovations driver. If you look at what happened in World War II, how the world was before and after, and that was only 6 years, right? We had a nuclear bomb after it, right? We had a computer after it. All this did not exist before the war. How airplanes have changed, right? This was disruptive innovation and many other things. But it's a war, which we don't want. So rather than having to have a war for military innovation, how about looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of deterrence by utilizing innovation? I mean, the only believable deterrence is when you're very innovative. Right? If you have an Iron Dome that's working better than the one Israel currently has, right, then people will think twice before they send you rockets because they're not going to be efficient, and so you're avoiding a war. Putin, I don't think Putin takes many of the European countries very seriously military wise, and maybe for good reason. That needs to change. And the only way to change this is innovation, because it's not going to be more tanks. We all know that. Right? And so also for me personally, my opinion on this has changed. I mean, we've been very well protected by our American friends. You know, we've in return we were very friendly in the Western world with them. That system is broken. We did not break it. We liked it a lot, but it's broken. We have to now stand for ourselves, right? And not meaning that we were going to be going against America, no, but we have a clear message, right? Take care for yourselves. And if we're increasing the military budgets of NATO to 5%, and if we're putting out 500 billion euros as a extra money for the military, it cannot flow into more tanks. I mean, maybe a few, but that most of that money should go into innovation. Now, how do you bring inventions, into the market and in this into the battlefield or into the forces? Obviously, with the tools that we've developed for civil innovation or dual use innovation, it's the same thing. Right? There may be another level of secrecy for some, but other than that, it's the same thing. It needs to be quick. It needs to be efficient. We need to take risks. Right? Some may fail, but like for Ukraine, I guess a lot of things have failed, or they work for a time and then they fail because the other side reacts to it, and then you have to evolve further. So you have to go fast, right, and bring the money to the bright people that know how to move this forward to create real deterrence and keep Europe peaceful. That's all. And this is why I said, okay, I guess we've now had the opportunity to develop tools for this over years. We must offer this to this purpose as well. We must. Even though I'm not, I've never been to the military. I'm a Kriegsdienstverweigerer, how we say in Germany, with this wonderful compound nouns that we can create. But I think I learned that the world has changed, and it's no comfortably hiding behind our big US friends. We have to do this by ourselves, and this is why I said this. Of course, when you say something like this, you're always sort of now reaching into an ecosystem that is already there. Not everybody likes our suggestion. Obviously, I still, after all these discussions, believe it's the right way to go, and I hope we get the opportunity to do that.
I think it's great. And I can understand that a lot of entrenched interests would say, ooh, hands off. But I think I've also seen a bit of a mind shift among what they call the primes, the traditional defense suppliers who are used to selling gigantic weapon systems, planes, tanks, things. They're also realizing that an AI enabled, drone powered transparent battlefield with real-time decision making, these are innovations that you're not going to be able to do without in the future. And so, yeah, it really is a race. I mean, one data point really has always blown my mind about what's going on in Ukraine now is that generally from people I know that are working in the innovation space in Ukraine, it's roughly 8 weeks from idea to battlefield deployment for a lot of innovations. And that's because it has to be, because I think usually you have about a 2 week window on either side to bring an innovation before the other side has countered it. And so there's just an incredible sort of um, cycle right here where two sides are trying to out innovate each other. So it's really fascinating.
And it's not
So
just, maybe one thing worth mentioning as well, it's not just the battlefield. We might say World War III is already going. It's a cyber war that's going on,
cyber
right? And
war.
it's going on everywhere, and that's another same thing, right? The attack side. I mean, now we're using AI for the attack side. Of course, you're using AI for the defense side, but it's all in the virtual realm that where you don't really see this happening until they're in, right? So that's already true, and there's no time to waste on these things.
Yeah, it's really great. It's interesting, you said that 10% of your current budget is going to social innovation. I think some of the most amazing things I saw on a visit to Ukraine were these charities where citizens are funding it, and it's building a bridge to capabilities for the military. I mean, you can walk into some of these offices in Kiev and they're literally sitting there building drones, sort of like as after school projects, if you will. I mean, everyone sees it as their responsibility to pitch in. It's not just something where, oh, we have defense contractors and off we go. So
It's
let's
also how a lot of these, so one final word about this, how a lot of these drone companies in the Ukraine were created out of these, garage efforts that they had. And then they figured, oh, this scales, right? And now they're building, I don't know how many hundred thousands of drones every month. So it's crazy.
Absolutely. I've met so many entrepreneurs from Ukraine who tell me, I used to have an AI vision company or I used to have a software company, but when
Right.
the war broke out, I pushed that all aside and said, we're going to build submersible drones or, I mean, I've met really incredible stories. So it is, fascinating to see how innovation has just taken over that entire society and how they've designed everything for speed. So if one final thought, maybe at the big picture level on Germany and Europe and innovation. I mean, I know that you have in your wildest dreams some ideas about where Germany, thanks to SPRIN-D, could be in about 10 years with its innovation ecosystem or its ability to make these changes that you're working toward. What's your vision for 10 years from now or 15 years from now look like in terms of how Germany is different?
Call this Gründerzeit 2.0.
Founder era 2.0. Yeah.
On Founder Era 2.0, 1.0 was 1871, so it's 154 years or something if I do the math right. Yeah, it's about time that we did this. Technology has always continuously helped making our lives better. Technology has also done terrible things, but if you look at 300 years ago to today, how we're living our lives, how long we're living it, how healthy we're living it, how well educated, and blah, 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 everything, that's all based on the, technological progress. We have to rev this machine up again. And I think in 10 years from now, we will see a lot of that. I mean, if any of the technologies that I mentioned, creating energy, green energy in abundance, that will solve a lot of problem. I always call this the father of all breakthrough innovation is abundant energy that's green, available everywhere, because you can create clean water with it, you can even create food with it, and so forth, right? But the mother of innovation is education. It's the us as an asset to the world, so to speak, right? And that has to change. And I hope we've made not only progress but breakthroughs in 10 years from now in many of these areas, so that the lives of the people that then, right, and of the people that are coming will continue to improve like they did in the past 300 years.
Super. A few quick questions. We call it the lightning round. It's fun to ask at the end just for some short answers of things just kind of that spontaneously that pop up. And one that I always love asking is if you were to start over, but in a non-technical sector, in a non-innovation sector, what would you be pursuing your career in?
Musician. It's easy.
What instrument?
Well, I can't get that far from technology. I played around a lot with the synthesizers. I guess it would be that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
Or maybe a guitar. Guitar is actually a pretty versatile instrument that I only discovered recently. Not that I'm playing anything, but it's yeah, yeah, in that field, I guess. And also the life of a musician is kind of, it sounds like fun.
That's great. You have also in your family history, you could have lived outside Germany and have chosen to be here. What is something you love about Germany and Europe?
Europe, I think it's Europe. I'm a European by heart and also by genes, I guess, having the Spanish father. And I think it's the humanistic foundation everything sits on. I mean, I've been to the US a lot, but I was always missing that part where you can talk to anybody anywhere in Europe, and let's say there's a poor person on the street and we're all both feeling the same thing and thinking about how we could help this person. The age of enlightenment has worked for us very well. I think tolerance that we're exposing to other ways of life is important, because I like the colorfulness of that creates. Right? The world is just much more interesting if it is that. And I always felt that there's more of that in Europe than in other in any other place in the world that I've been to. So I always came back, I think, for that reason.
That's great. Here's a tough question for innovation: Berlin or Munich or maybe Leipzig?
But obviously Leipzig, because that's where we are. They're all different places, and you didn't mention Dresden, for example, which is high
Interesting.
on microelectronics, which is a fantastic ecosystem with fantastic people, and also places like Aachen or Tübingen or Freiburg. And if you look at these and in northern Germany, we have a few clusters that nobody knows of, or even in Westphalia, in Bielefeld, in other, or Paderborn. We have a project in Paderborn, which is not famous for disruptive innovation outside the church, I guess. No, there is this microbubbles thing is there. You would be surprised where you find these people. And of course, the big cities, and you mentioned those, and Leipzig is I don't know, number whatever, 6 or so in Germany, is still a big city and a special place. They're all different. That's the great thing about Europe and Germany. Berlin is very different from Munich, very different from Leipzig, from Cologne, from what have you. But they all have character.
That's great. One final couple of quick questions, a bit of nostalgia here. What's a piece of tech that you miss from the 1990s or 2000s?
1990s or 2000s, a piece of
Any
tech
early
that
tech?
yeah, early tech for me is more the 70s and 80s.
Okay, bring
and,
it
and
on.
it's I think it's the old microcomputers where you still understood everything, right? There was no operating system. Yeah, like the TRS-80 Model 1. That was one of my machines. I knew everything of this machine.
TRS, that was Tandy Radio Shack,
Yeah,
right?
or church shit or something. Yeah, TRS is Tandy Radio Shack. They built a computer and it was very successful for some time. Or like the Apple II, it was same thing. You could just open it. You knew everything. You knew the whole software stack. Still, for the PC, I did that. The IBM PC. It came in '82, I believe. I wrote an own operating system for it. That was full control over the tech stack, feeling I knew everything that was going on. And now with my iPhone, I don't even own it anymore, right? Apple can turn it off from the outside, and it's hard to open it, and then you see nothing, right? This is a very closed ecosystem. So I think I miss that openness even on the hardware side.
Brilliant, brilliant. Final thought to end on a positive note. What is something that makes you optimistic about the future of Europe?
I'm sitting in the middle of this chocolate factory. It's all these people that that come by every day, and they all have grit, right? They all are driven by a purpose, and they all want to make the world a better place. Uh, in all these dark communications that we're having nowadays, driven by social media that enforces the dark side, there's a lot of light. We're just not seeing enough of it. And I'm lucky enough to see it, and the whole team at Sprint sees it, and everybody involved at Sprint. This is why we're communicating a lot to get it to the outside world and say, look, guys, there's not only hope, the world will be a better place for sure as we move forward. So don't listen to the people that tell you otherwise. It's not, we were just printing a Sprint shirt that says pessimism is a waste of time. And that's what it is.
Brilliant. Rafael Laguna de la Vera, thank you so much for bringing the light and thanks for talking with us today. And good luck to you in driving innovation for Europe. It's a pleasure to talk.
Thanks, Clark. It was good fun again.